Tom O'Connell, and I am here with engineer and TTT producer Rico Morales. Rico is going to be hosting the show next week while I am taking a 4th of July break at beautiful Lake Vermilion. Thanks for hosting next week.
That's Rico. Right. Thanks for the reminder.
Okay, yeah, right. So a little program note. Truth to Tell will be moving to the 1 o'clock hour beginning on Monday, July 31st. That's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, not the early morning. It is part of a larger schedule change for our public affairs programs here on KFAI. And it'll be, as is now, right after Pacifica Radio. Democracy Now! So I hope that 1 o'clock hour works for you. And remember, you can hear our programs on our Truth to Tell website at www.truthtotell.org, as well as the KFAI archive. Just go to kfai.org and click on Demand, and then you can find Truth to Tell and all the other great programs here at KFAI in our station archives for 2 or 3 weeks after the live broadcast. In urban and rural communities across the nation, a powerful grassroots movement called Indivisible is demanding meetings with their congressional representatives and finding other ways to push back on issues like health care, travel bans, and climate change, among many others. In Minnesota's suburban 2nd and 3rd congressional districts, Republican Congressman Jason Lewis, he's in the 2nd, and Eric Paulson represents the 3rd. They're both feeling some of the heat. And here to tell us about this remarkable explosion of grassroots political energy is Clara Severson. Clara, is that Severson or Severson?
Severson.
Severson. I should have asked before we went on. Clara Severson, who is co-chair of Indivisible Congressional District CD3. That's the one represented by Congressman Eric Paulson. Welcome, Clara.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
All right, we'll get to you in a second here. Later in the program, we will be welcoming Nicholas Hartlett to our studios. Nicholas is a faculty member in the Urban Education Department at Metropolitan State University, who has just written a book called The Neoliberal Agenda and the Student Debt Crisis. Access to higher education is essential to economic opportunity, and the stories in Professor Hartlett's book illustrate why this is such a critical social justice issue. So, today, grassroots politics and educational equity, 2 of our favorite themes here on Truth to Tell. We're going to open up the phones in about 10 minutes, so please give us a call at that time. We'll give out the number then. Okay, Clara Severson, welcome to Truth to Tell. Tell us about how you got involved with Indivisible in the 3rd Congressional District.
Sure. So like many people, I woke up on November 9th, kind of shell-shocked. I had gone to bed early that night thinking, it's no big deal. I'm going to wake up and Hillary Clinton is going to be the elected, new president. And turns out I was very, very wrong. I called my mom and cried over the phone about climate change and just the whole number of issues because I didn't have any faith in Donald Trump. So I spent the next month or 2 in this stupor and didn't really know what to do with myself. But there were all of these online groups forming, especially Stand Up Minnesota. And that group connected me with my co-chair named Jenna Martin, and we were able to talk about our mutual dislike of our representative, Eric Paulson. Mm-hmm. And from there, we started a petition that snowballed into Indivisible. So we really, really liked the Indivisible message and ended up getting some fabulous people on board right away. We had our first meeting with about 40 people in the upstairs of a grocery store. And from there, we've got almost 1,600 people involved.
Such a classic story, and we've been hearing stories like this from other folks with other but very similar organizations who were shocked by what happened and had different reactions that took different lengths of time, but eventually found their way to some pretty impressive grassroots action. So this Indivisible is really interesting because it's sprung up all across the country, and there's this remarkable 23-page guide. It's kind of a how-to for folks who want to get active. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the most compelling parts about the Indivisible Guide is you don't have to be a Democrat to follow this guide. What it says is that if you are unhappy with your representation, if your representative is not holding town halls, if they're not meeting with constituents, if they're saying one thing and voting another way, we can follow this guide and somehow take action, which is just, it's so cool because we have Republicans and Democrats and everybody in between in our group. And we all connect over this mutual, again, distrust of Eric Paulson because he hasn't had a town hall in 7 years. So, you got to start asking, why is that? And there are many people across the political spectrum that just don't think that that's acceptable.
Okay. So how can people get a hold of this guide? Because I looked at it online, and it's just a very simple, straightforward, kind of wise approach to how people can get active and have an impact.
Yeah, if you go to indivisibleguide.com, you can download a PDF or whatever kind of document works for you. But it's a very easy read. It takes maybe a half an hour, and there are supplemental resources on top of that as we move forward with different policy focuses.
Okay. We might come back to that a little more, but one of the focuses in the guide, there's a number of ways to be active and tactics to use, but a major focus was on congressmen, local congressmen all over the country. I've heard there's like 5,000 indivisible groups, and it's partly mirrored, is my understanding, after what the Tea Party did after the election of President Barack Obama, who probably also woke up that morning shell-shocked, but from a different perspective and not sure what to do. And they found a very effective strategy in terms of confronting their local Congress people, particularly Democrats, with the result that 2 years later, the Democrats lost control of the House to the Republicans. Do you see that Tea Party analogy, or that's really not important one way or another to you?
Yeah, I definitely see similarities. Clearly, we have different platforms, but what I think is really, really neat about both movements is constituents who have never been involved in politics before are getting involved. And that is one of the most beautiful things about democracy. So if that's what we're looking at, yeah, I think there's a lot there. But, we kind of think that we're we're headed in the right direction here.
You got some different goals, some different values, a different mission as far as the issues, but some similarities at least in terms of holding congressmen's feet to the fire. So tell us a little bit about Congressman Eric Paulson and efforts that you've been involved with to get him to relate to you guys.
Sure. So when we first started, we definitely had the mission of trying to influence some of Eric's votes. We know that Eric was preceded by Jim Ramstad, and Jim Ramstad was loved in the district. He was a very moderate conservative, and frankly, probably someone even I could have voted for. And I'm a diehard liberal. Okay. But so Eric came into the fold kind of talking like he was a moderate, but if we look at his votes, he is very much the farthest thing from a moderate you can get. He has a very bad record on the environment, on healthcare, on social issues, and because our district did go for Hillary Clinton by 9 percentage points, we think that we've got a very good chance of flipping this seat. And, we've tried multiple times to reach out to his office, and we've met with him one-on-one and just really tried to express our fear and our stories on how the Trump administration is affecting our lives. And he doesn't listen. He says that he's taking notes and whatnot, but then he goes to Washington and votes with the far right every single time.
He has a persona that is very moderate, and he's soft-spoken. He's not someone who goes out like talk radio style, and not just talk radio, and attacks people. He's very moderate in his sort of tone. At least that's what I've noticed from afar here in Minneapolis. Now, one of the things that Indivisible says in its document is that one thing that all congressmen are alike on is that they want to get reelected. And so if you can put on pressure that changes their calculus, you may actually be able to get some concessions or some changes in position. But I wonder about that a little bit. Clearly, Congress want to get elected, but the cost of somebody, I want to get your reaction to this, like an Eric Paulson or like a Jim Ramstad in the 2nd Congressional District, to actually switch a position. Wouldn't that make their own base so angry that they could get caught in a crossfire? So maybe in addition to, so there's really, when you look at survival, you can go against the majority if your party, and maybe even your sincere beliefs are at a different place.
Yeah. I think that Eric is always going to vote with whatever Paul Ryan
Okay.
would prefer that he votes. And that can be for his reelection, but part of the problem is that Eric has never been defined to our district before. So that is what we're working really hard to do, because we believe that if people do see what his actual voting record is and not just what he says he's going to do, I think they're going to be running away from him in droves. So.
Okay. So your goal is less to influence his votes, although it would be nice, I'm sure, from your perspective, but it's more to educate yourselves and the larger voting public in the 3rd District. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, we've tried. We tried for months to influence his votes, and he clearly had no interest in listening to any of our stories. We had a woman with cancer go into his office and start crying to his staff about the fact that she's terrified about her health care. She has people in her family who also have cancer, one of her daughters as well. And the staff members argued with her about this. They were not sympathetic. They didn't take notes.
Yeah.
It was a horrible experience for this woman. And it's happened over and over and over again. And it's just shocking that human beings are being treated this way just so that Eric Paulson can stay elected.
Okay. I think we can invite some call-ins now. We're talking to Clara Severson about this remarkable movement here in Minnesota and across the country called Indivisible. It is bringing citizen awareness to and pressure on mostly Republican congresspeople. And if you got a question or a comment about Indivisible or other forms of grassroots organizing or just anything else, give us a call. It's, well, not anything, but anything vaguely related. Give us a call at Truth to Tell at 612-341-0980. That's 612-341-0980. Ready, gentlemen? Okay. All right. So, Claire, we were talking about the sort of goal of educating the public. I want to get to some of Eric's issues in a minute. Yeah, I think we may be having a question here. Should we go right to it? Caller on the line? No. Okay. So you mentioned just the starting of this organization and others like it, from being pretty much alone to meeting other people. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it seems like that's one of the hardest, going from zero to this really robust organization.
Yeah. So one of the best parts about being a grassroots group at this time is we get to use all of the fruits of social media. So that definitely played a part in us getting our message out there. We've got a group of incredibly active people in this group on Facebook. We've also got our public page, Indivisible MNO3, and that keeps people informed. It makes sure that they know exactly what Eric's up to in Washington. And, you can easily invite your friends into this fold when you're on Facebook or Twitter. We've got a newsletter that goes out. It's just staying up to date. And there's so many people in our group that are behind the scenes running these different channels. Mm-hmm. And I'm so thankful to them for day after day paying attention to what's out there and making sure that the people that are following us have all of that information so that when they're visiting Eric's office, they're coming to protest, they're making calls, they are educated, and they've got personal stories to tell that are related.
Okay. So so you have a lot of different kinds of actions. Do you do demonstrations, small visits to the office? Do you have picnics? I mean, what are some of the kind of activities?
Sure. So we definitely do demonstrations. In fact, we've got a demonstration coming up this Thursday at 5 p.m. in Eden Prairie. If anyone wants more information about that, head to Indivisible MN03 on Facebook. And so we've done a number of demonstrations on different things, but healthcare is definitely the top issue right now and has been for quite a bit of time now. We had an awesome kickoff picnic for this summer. 200 people plus showed up. We had the congressional candidates in the 3rd District come and speak to constituents. And on top of that, we were visiting the office quite a bit at first, but honestly, we've been treated so poorly in that office that it's not worth it to us anymore. So we definitely encourage people to visit the office on their own time. But as a group, we are more focused on doing community outreach.
Okay, great. We have a caller on the line. Caller, welcome to Truth to Tell. Have a question or comment? Caller, hello. Well, the caller's gone. Call back again if somehow you got cut off. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're talking about maybe you're not going to be doing as many visits because of the staff. Wouldn't you think that a well-run congressional office would train its staff to at least be courteous?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, isn't it? I've experienced so many times where we've gone as a group with new people who've never visited the office before, and they were stunned by how we were treated, how we were spoken to, and there are a number of people who have actually been threatened with arrest, myself included. Oh. And they did call the police on some lovely older women that were there one day that were, singing some songs and stuff in the hallway, and they called the police on them. Okay. I cannot wrap my head around that. Okay. And, the persona that Eric puts out there is completely contrasted.
Very mellow. Okay. We'll come back to that. We have a caller on the line. Welcome to Truth to Tell. Have a question or comment?
Yes. Good morning, Tom and
good
Claire
morning.
and Rico. Thank you for this important conversation. Down here in Northfield, I'm involved primarily on Facebook, but I participate in person when I can with Indivisible. And I just want to point out there's a wonderful Indivisible of Minnesota Facebook group page, and there's also a Cannon Valley Indivisible for CD2, of course, where we have a Republican congressman that we're trying to replace Jason Lewis. And Cannon Valley group has been very active. They've had meetings with town halls, and when Lewis doesn't show up, as he never does, they sometimes invite future candidates for his position. So I'm just curious whether that's being done in CD3 too. Have you met with candidates? And I guess my question is what is there any relationship, or do you anticipate, or what is the relationship with the DFL between Indivisible and DFL in Minnesota? And also, do you anticipate endorsing any candidates as the primaries come around and in the general election?
Okay, great questions from Tom from Northfield, who is a regular caller here on Truth to Tell and always has very smart and sophisticated comments and questions. Clara, there are about 2 or 3 questions in there at least.
Yeah. So I'm so happy to hear that there's someone here speaking about the CD2 group, because I have met with some of the folks down there and they're awesome. They're ready to go. And I've seen what they've been doing in the media, which is exactly what we want. So when Jason Lewis doesn't show up to these events, the media writes about it. And that is huge. That reaches tens of thousands of people. So thank you so much for your involvement. So I'm going to start from the last question here. We currently do not anticipate endorsing any candidates. And the reason for that is we've got 4 declared candidates here in CD3 right now. And if we chose anytime soon, even before the DFL endorses, we think that there might be some fraction in our group. We would love for anybody who has found the candidate that works for them to go volunteer on their campaign and, do everything that you can to move them forward until the DFL endorsement process or the August primary of next year. And our group, Indivisible MN03, has definitely had an awesome relationship with all 4 of these candidates. We speak to them regularly. We invite them to as many events as possible. It's important for us that they get as much exposure as possible. So in terms of the town halls and things similar to what CD2 has been doing, we just had a town hall with Keith Ellison. and Eric Paulson was invited. He, of course, didn't show. He sent a staffer instead to check it out. But
So Keith Ellison is the congressional rep
Yeah.
for Minneapolis and some inner-ring suburbs.
Yes. So we figured if Eric Paulson's not going to answer our questions, we need someone who will. And Keith stepped up to do that, and it was amazing. It was so great to have him there. We've also done listening tours where we've talked about different events like civic engagement and immigration and healthcare. And Eric Paulson was invited to all three of those events. Of course, he did not show. So, whether he's there or not, we're going to keep moving forward. We're going to continue to educate the district about not only what Eric's voting is, but how these issues are going to affect each and every one of us.
So he's not showing to these meetings. Now, I think it was either he or Jason Lewis, or maybe both of them, that said we have other ways that we engage with constituents. So what are some of those other ways with Eric Paulson? And obviously you had a big sigh, so they're not working as far as you're concerned.
No, this is a very sore spot for us. Eric likes to do these things he calls telephone town halls, but let's be clear, they are not town halls. They are robocalls that interrupt people around 7 p.m. on a random weeknight. If you don't answer the phone, you can't get on the call, so you have to be right by your phone. You don't get any heads up that this is going to happen, and you're randomly called. And it's essentially a long promotion for Eric Paulson. He takes questions, but they're pre-screened questions, so you don't get the sentiment and the personal value of who's asking those questions. If you do ask a question, it may not even be answered, and there's no follow-up. So if Eric does not provide an adequate answer, whoever asked the question cannot let him know that, and that's frankly unacceptable. So again, these are robocalls. They're not town halls. And he's also tried his hand at a Facebook Live event, I'll say it, but he doesn't announce when he's going to be live. So if you're at work, you can't tune in. If you are 15 minutes late, you miss the whole thing and you can't ask questions live through the comments section. And last time he did this, we were told by his office it was going to happen sometime in the evening, but it turned out to happen at about 10:35 in the morning. So I went into the grocery store, and by the time I came out, it was over.
Oh.
So, he's using all of these tactics where he is in 100% control. And frankly, it's just disgustingly unacceptable. He needs to come and meet with his constituents in person and take the heat, because if he wants to be a representative, that's what he needs to do. That's what Democrats did in 2009, and that's what he needs to do now if he wants to have any chance of keeping his seat.
I bet there's conversations going on behind the scenes because, yes, among Republicans, because, yes, many Democratic congressmen did meet with the Tea Party, and many of them lost. So I wonder if there's a strategy that says, let's just, silence is golden here. Let's just minimize our exposure. It seems like that's how he's acting anyway. Do we have a call? Okay, we're going to get a call here, and while the caller's coming in, remember, you can call us in at 612-341-0980. Caller on the line, Josh. Josh Lemire is with us. Welcome, caller. Welcome to Truth to Tell.
Yeah, I like to listen on Mondays. But one question on the robocalls: do you do you indicate an interest to be on the list of people they call, or is it just a random selection of numbers, which doesn't seem to me? I mean, it all seems to, I don't know, which is it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. As far as we can tell, it is completely random. They've got a system that you can target certain parts of the district or certain zip codes. But other than that, it is not. They're not picking and choosing people, but I'll tell you, I've never been called, and I know for a fact they have my number. So
I bet they do have your number.
Take whatever that means, but it's just a no notice self promotion.
Good question. Thanks, Clara Severson. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll be right back to Truth to Tell.
All right. You're listening to Fresh Air Community Radio, KFAI 90.3 FM Minneapolis and 106.7 FM St. Paul, Radio Without Boundaries. We're back now on Truth to Tell with Tom O'Connell. The time is 9:25. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Josh Lemire. And we're here with Clara Severson from Indivisible, Congressional District 3. We've talked a little bit about, how people went from sort of concern and even stupor when President Trump was elected to gradually coming together all across the country, but in the 3rd Congressional District. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about some of the issues that people are concerned about there and a little bit about the district. I think it used to be that there were the city limits, and that was Minneapolis and St. Paul, and then the suburbs. And I think a lot of people in the city thought that suburban people were all, pretty conservative and were very different. Now we're finding that there's a lot of commonality of interest. So how would you typify some of your district politically and also some of the issues that people care about?
Sure. Yeah, so that's an awesome point. The suburbs used to be a very reliable Republican voting area, but it's starting to change as we've seen through the last couple decades. So our district is purple, and we love it that way.
So what is purple, just in case
Yes,
someone's
so
listening?
that means it's a very moderate voting district. So we've got many people in the middle of the political spectrum who will vote either Democrat or Republican, so they don't just vote straight party ticket. And that is the key here with our group. We know that there are people out there that if they learn about Eric's voting record, that they won't vote for him anymore. There are so many people in our group already who said, yeah, I voted for Eric in 2014 or 2016, and I had no idea that he is that kind of guy. So if we can just get the information out there, we're going to be in really good shape. One thing that our district and Minnesotans in general care a lot about is the environment. We have one of the best states in the entire country to be an outdoorsman. And Eric claims that he loves the outdoors, he loves the boundary waters, but that is contrasted by his votes. He has a 16% voting record or whatnot with the League of Conservation Voters. That's opposed to his Jim Ramstad. He had like an 80 or 90% percentage with them. So Eric voted against the Stream Protection Act, I believe. So he thinks it's okay for people to dump their crap into our streams and waterways. So if he loves the boundary waters so much, I don't understand how that makes any sense. And then, of course, the big thing right now is healthcare. Mm-hmm. And as most people have been talking about, Medicaid is the big factor here. Everybody, no matter who you are, knows somebody or is personally affected by someone who is on Medicaid. And if we have an $800 billion cut to Medicaid so that rich folks can get $600 billion in tax cuts, it's unacceptable. And it clearly shows that Eric does not live by the values that he says he does. He does not support people who have low income. He does not support the sick and the elderly. And 50% of childbirths in Minnesota are on Medicaid coverage. Mm-hmm. So, if he's pro-life, how does that square with taking away the coverage from children the day they're born?
Well, yeah, we're going to have, actually, that's a good segue into a program announcement. We'll be having later on in July folks from Planned Parenthood here to talk about their perspective on what's going on. And, of course, Planned Parenthood has become a punching bag for many conservatives in terms of this healthcare legislation. So good point. What are some of the cities and towns that are part of the 3rd District?
Yeah, so our district is very large for a suburban district. We go down to Bloomington all the way up to Rogers and as far west as like Mound and Excelsior, Victoria. So there is a really cool mix of rural and suburban in our district. And we have noticed that based on the voting statistics, the more rural you get, the more red you get. So that is going to be a very big goal for us is to reach out to those folks in the rural districts or rural part of the district. And, it's just not enough anymore to count on the areas that are going to vote your way. You can't just focus on them. We saw that in 2016. You've got to reach out to everybody and show that all of these issues are going to pertain to rural, suburban, and urban voters.
And are you doing that?
We are certainly trying. It's not easy, especially as a grassroots group just getting started here. But I think I may have glossed over when one of the callers asked earlier about our relationship with the DFL. Okay. But we've got a very good relationship with the DFL. Many folks in our group are a part of their Senate districts or the congressional district DFL, and that's awesome. Really, really great. However, we are not a DFL group. That we are nonpartisan. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have everybody in between. So we take that relationship very. We go about it very carefully.
Okay, all right. So a very diverse district voted for Hillary Clinton, but over the last a long time, electing Republicans, some more moderate, quote unquote, than others, to Congress, and you're trying to break out of that. Okay, give us a call here at 612-341-0980. We're talking to Indivisible Minnesota, and we're talking about the grassroots efforts to raise awareness about what Republicans are doing and what congressional representatives have been doing, and trying really hard to get meetings with the reps, but maybe more important, right, to have conversations with constituents in those districts. Okay. Thanks for coming in, Clara. And we're going to take a short break here. Welcome back to Truth to Tell. We've been talking in the first half hour with Clara Severson of Indivisible Minnesota. She's a co-chair of that group in Congressional District 3, represented in Congress by Republican Congressman Eric Paulson. If you have questions about that or about the next topic that we're coming into, give us a call at 612-341-0980. That's 612-341-0980. So Professor Nicholas Hartlett from the Urban Education Department is in the studio, as the Urban Ed Department at Metropolitan State University. He has just co-authored a book called The Neoliberal Agenda and the Student Debt Crisis. The book has a kind of heavy title, Nicholas, and we'll get into neoliberalism in a bit. But I can also attest that the stories you are telling are really compelling. And Professor Hartlett will be discussing your book, Professor Hartlett's book, at the East Side Freedom Library at 7 p.m. on July 19th. ESFL is on the east side of St. Paul and a real partner with Truth to Tell. Lots of great events there. And for information on this and all the great programs, you can go to their website, www.eastsidefreedomlibrary.com. So, Nicholas, welcome to Truth to Tell, and thank you for coming down.
I'm honored to be here. Thanks.
Okay. So your book makes a very powerful case that student debt, is really a social justice issue at the bottom of the line. And I wanted to start with this wonderful phrase you have about millennials and their student debt. And some folks are calling them ninjas, standing for no income and no jobs or assets. I thought that was rather an arresting way to look at the fate that many millennials get to when they spend all this money and borrow all this money and then have to somehow pay it back. How big a problem is student debt in your mind?
Yeah, so the last time I checked, we're at a $1.4 trillion debt. And to give you context for that, how big of amount of money that is, in 2008, when the banks were bailed out, that's about 16 trillion. So we're at 1.4 of that, which with that context, it kind of shows we can get out of this debt crisis for the collegians, the college students, myself included. I have student debt. So I came to this work given the severity, as you said, ninjas, no income, no jobs, no assets, from a personal piece of having debt, but then also as a professional, as a professor doing research.
Okay. And as a teacher, you've got students at Metropolitan State University who are studying to become urban educators. right? And state universities are certainly less expensive than perhaps some private universities, but the better endowed of those actually have more scholarships and that sort of thing. Are you concerned about the debt that your students are going to have as they enter the teaching profession?
Absolutely. I'm actually teaching summer classes right now, Tom, and I talk to my students regularly about this. The irony that we're facing is we have a businessman in the White House. And a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump thought that his business acumen would lead to better results. Yeah. The dystopic reality is that actually things are going to get real worse very fastly. So when you think about these students who are studying to be teachers that I work with, they're eligible for programs such as public service loan forgiveness programs. But the Secretary of Education and as well as Donald Trump would like to kind of remove those programs from existence. So those programs that would allow folks to accumulate debt but discharge it after a period of time. You know, if you make 10 years of on-time payments, 120 payments on time, the rest of the money is, forgiven. So we're really in the eye of the storm, I believe. The book was published at a time almost in the eye of the storm, I believe. And we'll have to wait to see if it, how things fare.
Okay. Now, one of the ideas around this phrase neoliberalism, and it is the idea that education is not a public good but a private good, or at least partly a private good. Can you tell our listeners what's the difference between a public good and a private good, and where you see education fitting into that?
Yeah, so this whole notion of neoliberalism, it's not really new per se. It's been with us since the 70s and 80s, and it is speaking to capitalism, specifically in terms of deregulation and safety nets. So when I mentioned about Donald Trump and Betsy DeVos wanting to remove some of the protections and programs, that's part of this neoliberalism. Public education as a public good and as a private good. I'll give you an example. A lot of people outside of education, non-professors, if you were to just go down the street and talk to people, they would view education as an investment, and they would use terms like return on investment. They would think, oh, well, you went into hair cutting, so of course you're not going to make that much money. If you wanted to get more money, you should have gone into a career or profession that paid off more, and it's kind of your fault. You should have invested wisely. That would be more of a human capitalist approach to it, that you investing in your future. But some of the chapters in the book illustrate the kind of internal contradictions that are inherent in such a belief. There's a chapter by a gal who is older now and went on to get her PhD as a older person, and she talks about disaccumulation. This notion that the opposite of accumulation. I'm a younger man, so as a person with their doctorate, I have my life ahead of me to make money and accumulate assets. Buy a house, which I own a house, and get my retirement nest egg going. But she didn't have that reality because she obtain her education later on in life. She was previously on welfare, a divorcee. So oftentimes these life circumstances entrap us and contribute and compound to this. So many times people say, well, Nicholas, the student debt crisis, yes, it's a $1.4 trillion problem you mentioned, but it's not the people with PhDs and highly educated people that are really hurting. It's the folks who maybe didn't graduate, or they went to a for-profit school, or they got a degree in cosmetology and they can't really pay that back. And the debt load is actually small. We're not talking about six-figure debt. We're talking, even a $5,000 student loan. That is true mathematically, but we cannot express the importance, though, of hearing everyone's voice in this debt crisis. Right. And the businessmen that we're electing, businesswomen, they're really making things worse.
The one of the chapters was on African American in particular, and they seem to have a higher incidence of debt in the lower graduation record, and the system seems to work less well. And I was struck by the chapter was written around the Langston Hughes poem, "What Happens When a Dream is Deferred?" And I never thought about that poem as having to do with student debt. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so Cynthia Levy's chapter, she is in the eye of the storm. She works and lives she works for a public school there in Chicago, and as we know, Illinois is almost 2 years without a state budget. Bruce Rauner, again, a businessman, a billionaire, and Madigan of the state legislature. They're at odds with one another, and so yeah, the Hughes poem was very profound. And she, being African American herself, and a woman who is an alum of Chicago State University. And Chicago State University, if you haven't followed, they were in the news for actually possibly having to close, like shut the doors to be shuttered because of, Rauner and the other folks not passing a budget. So we're really, really sharing stories that are timely and capture how nuanced and widespread this debt crisis is.
Okay. You're fairly new to Minnesota and to Metropolitan State University. Would you see the Minnesota system with this mix of community colleges, community technical colleges, state universities, big research university, University of Minnesota, and lots of private liberal arts schools? Are we sort of typical, atypical when it comes to student debt, as far as you know?
Well, it was interesting. I don't want to bash my institution, but I graduated from Winona State with my bachelor's and master's. And when I was doing this research, we cite TICA's, the Institute of they do research on student debt and accessibility, college accessibility, Institute of College Accessibility, and the Winona State was cited on there. And part of my work doing this research with a colleague, Lucille Eckrich, we wrote an article about my own journey about student debt and how I did acquire some debt, irrespective of the fact that I received scholarships, generous scholarships that funded my bachelor's and master's. So is it atypical? I think Minnesota is atypical in many respects. Metro State, for sure, is atypical and I think very avant-garde. We're very affordable. We're a minority-serving institution. Many of our students are first generation, students of color, and I love it. That's why I came to Metro State. But in terms of the state, if it's atypical or not, I can't answer that.
Yeah, okay. All right. Truth in radio journalism. I worked at Metro State as a professor for 30 years, but I did not pay or urge Nicholas to say those nice things about my university. Yeah. We're talking now in the second half of the program about student debt, and we're going to take a short break. Okay, welcome back to Truth to Tell. I'm Tom O'Connell. We're in the studio today. In this first half hour, we talked about Indivisible Minnesota and grassroots organizing with Clara Severson, co-chair of Congressional District 3, Indivisible. We're talking a bit now with Professor Nicholas Hartlett, who's an urban educator at Metropolitan State University, and who has co-written a book on student debt, the student debt crisis. We could spend lots of time. One of the features of the book are people's stories. You tell your own many other stories across a number of occupations, although a lot of them were in our educators. But let's talk a bit about what can be done.
Yeah. So it's easy to criticize, but how do you build up? Where do we go from here? Well, one is the difficulty of unringing a bell. A lot of the work that we came across in this book is a lot of people thinking, it's something new. But actually, it's just new wine in an old bottle. And until we grasp the idea that neoliberalism is a fundamental problem to education, that it's a barrier. We really can't, we can change the chairs on the Titanic, but we're still going to sink. Our suggestion in the book builds upon the work of Keith Ellison as well as Raul Grijalva, both congressmen, and their work in the Congressional Progressive Caucus about a people's budget. We opened up the segment about contextualizing this problem of 1.4 trillion in the face of a 16 trillion bank bailout. We've done in the past. This is small compared to 16 trillion, but it's funding priorities. It's states actually funding public education. And I know there's a lot of good work being done, folks that want to make college tuition free and what have you. We have to be mindful, however, of that work. Who receives the benefits from that? Promise programs, these programs of if you graduate high school and you have these income requirements, you can get 2 years of college paid for or more. So those are some programs and possibilities.
Right. So like so many things in the United States, a patchwork of programs is what we have now, but maybe Keith Ellison's program outlines something more comprehensive.
Yes. And there's other strike debt. There's other grassroots organizing being done to actually, have a debt jubilee, so to speak. What we do need to do is put protections on for debt. That this debt, and I totally understand, right? It's unsecured debt because if you go to get a car loan, you have some credit scores checked and what have you. But with student loans, if you want to study philosophy, you can just apply with a FAFSA. I understand that, but what we need to do is kind of reimagine that we want to provide free or accessible higher education, that it benefits us all. So when we share and we make it more accessible, we all become richer in the process.
That's the idea of a public good. It benefits individuals, but it also benefits society as a whole. You mentioned some organizations, and I was struck by the number of them. There's a group, and our listeners can just go online and write these in. There's a group called Strike Debt. There's the Debt Collective. There's Rolling Justice and Rolling Jubilee, which we just mentioned, and Student Loan Justice. So lots of rich resources out there, as well as student organizations here in Minnesota and faculty organizations who lobby the legislature every year to try to bring up the costs of education in our public systems. Well, thanks a lot for joining us, and you are going to be giving a presentation right at the Freedom Library. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, I'll be there. Really invite your friends, family members. We end the book by saying, well, what can we do? And one of the ideas is, have your library purchase a copy of the book, certainly, but also share the ideas, attend the community event, and just be part of the conversation.
That's great. Now, I can't, since we've been talking politics, resist asking you one final question, which is Bernie Sanders in his campaign had a fairly straightforward, easy to understand proposal for for the cost of education. What was his idea?
Yeah, his idea is returning that as a public good, that college should be free and it should be accessible, and not just the wealthy should be college educated. That's the dilemma too of this neoliberalism in the U.S. is the misunderstanding of it. I remember as a youngster being told, "Oh, you'd never go to Harvard. It's just too costly." Well, our research says that the kids that go to Harvard, whether they're poor or affluent, actually leave with lower amounts of debt. And it speaks to the point that you mentioned about endowments, and no one pays full sticker price.
So really embedded in all this is not only how the financial system works, but just the way in which higher education is consistent with, some would say, reproduces the class system already. Who gets to go to these schools and where do they end up? And so that's another part of neoliberalism, I guess. That would be part of the whole system. Well, thanks for coming. We deal a lot with educational equity issues, and oftentimes here we're talking about K-12, and I'm glad that we had a chance just to reflect a little bit on higher ed, which seems more and more essential to people's not only individual success, but the society as a whole. That was Nicholas Hartlett who joined us, and again, tune in to the website Eastside Freedom Library and join him for his talk. I think it should be a remarkably good conversation. So we're going to circle back for our final few minutes with Clara Severson. But if you have a call for Clara or Professor Hartlett, you can give us a call. We've got time for one more, 612-341-0980. So Clara, just let's kind of wrap up our conversation for today, at least on Indivisible. Do a little reflecting back. You've been at this now, it's been 6 months, right, since President Trump? And it was shortly after the election you got started, so you've been with it at least 6 months. What are your reflections so far, and what are your hopes going forward?
Sure. So kind of like I mentioned earlier, when we first started, we were working very hard to influence our Congressman Eric Paulson, and we realized pretty quickly it wasn't going to work. So since then, we have been moving forward with educational opportunities, whether it's Twitter workshops, issue-oriented workshops. We just want to reach out to the district. And as we move forward, an exciting thing that we'll be doing is getting more exposure for the candidates that are running against Eric Paulson. So, we're just going to focus on speaking to everyone in the district that we can and getting exposure for those opposing candidates.
Sometimes when an organization has been around for a while, there's an initial burst of enthusiasm. Things go on. Maybe people move on to other things. Maybe they get discouraged.
Tom, we have a surprise caller on the line right now.
Okay.
So let's take that call. Caller,
Great.
Can you give us your first name, please?
Steve.
Steve, and what's your question or comment?
Well, what is Mr. Hartlett's book called?
Oh, okay.
You only mentioned it once at the beginning of the conversation.
Go ahead.
I would ask you to, during conversations like that where there's a book involved, maybe a couple of times through the conversation, tell people who you're talking to and the name of the book or whatever they're talking about, because sometimes people tune in late and they don't get that information because you don't mention it again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for calling in, and my bad. Nicholas, here's your chance for another plug.
Sure, thanks for the call. The title is The Neoliberal Agenda and the Student Debt Crisis in U.S. Higher Education. It was published in 2017 by Routledge.
Okay. Thank you for that call. I really appreciate it, and I'll try to write that in big letters on my script here to do it at least twice, maybe 3 times, because we do have lots of book conversations here, and that's a good suggestion. So, Clara, let's see, we've still got a couple minutes. I had asked you to reflect on how it's gone so far, but also moving forward, and I think I was about to ask you, oftentimes in organizations begin with a burst of enthusiasm, and then start petering out. How are you going to keep the energy going?
Well, President Trump makes it pretty easy, to be honest. So we are kind of banking on the enthusiasm and opposition to Donald Trump. But at the same time, this is an extraordinary time for civic engagement. So as people realize that there are things that they can tangibly do, whether it's from their home or coming out to a protest, that is a very welcoming opportunity. And one last thing I wanted to mention is with this healthcare bill, anybody who should be calling the GOP senators that are on the fence about this bill and encourage them to vote against it. We've got Ron Johnson over in Wisconsin and many others. So please, everybody needs to be on the phones calling the senators about this bill. Even if they don't live in Wisconsin? Yeah, I think so, because this is going to affect everybody. It's not just, their own constituencies.
Okay. All right. Great. A final question, and I like your point about President Trump gives grassroots folks lots of opportunities and lots of incentives to stay active, and the importance of the health care bill as well. Is the press going to keep covering Indivisible? Can you make it a new enough story for that to happen? Because that's been a big part of your success as well. As long as Representative Eric Paulson keeps taking votes that are going to personally and
damage the lives of people in his district, yeah, I think they will. And that's going to be one of our main goals.
Okay, and then actually make a connection with what we've been talking about with Professor Hartleb. You have millennials in your group who are struggling with student debt.
Myself included.
Okay, all right. We can have a conversation after the show.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd love to.
Thank you very much, Clara Severson, and thank you very much, Professor Nicholas Hartleb, for joining us today. And thanks a lot, as usual, to Rico Morales for being our engineer and program host next week. Just a quick reminder, in case you missed it earlier, Truth to Tell will be moving to the 1 to 2 p.m. Time slot beginning July 31st. Same format, same show, just I get to sleep a little longer before coming into the studio. And remember that all of our shows are preserved on the Truth to Tell archives at truthtotell.org. We have a searchable database so you can hear them or rehear a program you missed going back several years, and also preserved on the KFAI archives at kfai.org for a couple weeks after each program. So I'll be on a 4th of July break next week, but Rico will be here with more Truth to Tell. And in the meantime, please do take care of each other.